Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and in today's video, we'll be taking a look at a Kyrian Shaman build. With patch 9.1, a lot of the new Covenant legendaries have been added for a variety of classes, each one of those legendaries offering a different way to play with your Covenant ability by either alternate in drastic ways or in minor ways. And in today's video, I want to take a look at the Kyrian Shaman legendary. Shaman being one of my favorite alts, second character to get to max level in Shadowlands, and I still continue to play this character today, even catching up to the renown of my rogue, so I can try this legendary and this build. Since we got a lot of these Covenant legendaries coming out, probably going to be more build videos in the future, but today let's just take a look at the Kyrian Shaman. The Kyrian ability for Shamans is Vesper Totem, and the legendary for the Kyrian Shaman reads: when 3 charges of Vesper Totem are consumed, Vesper Totem will radiate a 15-yard burst of 5,400 arcane damage and 2,000 healing. None of this is going to make sense unless you know exactly what Vesper Totem does. And since this isn't a popular Shaman Covenant, let's take a look at the Vesper Totem itself and how it functions with this legendary for the 3 specs of Shaman. Every single time you use a damaging ability after dropping Vesper Totem, it'll have 3 damage charges. Using 3 damaging abilities will proc 3 damage charges from the totem. The same thing could be done with the healing charges. The totem comes with 3 damage charges and 3 healing charges. So using 3 damaging abilities will proc 3 damage charges. Using 3 healing abilities will proc 3 healing charges. Every time either of the damage or healing charges are procced, the Shaman totem will erupt for extra damage thanks to this legendary. Blizzard wanted to keep a lot of these Shaman Covenant abilities, a little bit of DPS, a little bit of healing, so it can work for either spec, so they have very much a natural hybrid gameplay to it. Which might feel weird as a DPS to just stop damaging and start healing in order to proc your legendary, but if there's substantial enough damage behind this totem, then maybe it could have some use, and that's what I really wanted to test out today. In fact, I think some of the Kyrian Covenant legendaries are actually super interesting, and it just turns out that my Shaman is a Kyrian. This was my second character that I got to max level, and you guys, if you watch the streams on a regular, you know I love playing my alts. Mostly getting my keys done once a week just to maintain my alts, but the Kyrian Shaman is a unique build that not a lot of people picked up, and it's just something that I wanted to try ever since the alpha and the beta of Shadowlands. But there are some awesome developments in patch 9.1, particularly with Kyrian and the very last trait of the Mechanical's Soulbind that could make some of these Kyrian legendaries really cool to play with, and they were really exciting to try out back on PTR in the early days. The final trait of Mechanicus is going to be Effusive Anima Accelerator. Upon using your Covenant ability, you will do a blast of arcane damage split evenly between all targets over 8 seconds, and it reduces the cooldown of your Covenant ability. For me, it's by 4 seconds per enemy, up to a maximum of 20 seconds, which could turn your Vesper Totem, as well as some of the other Kyrian Covenant abilities, from a minute CD down to a 40-second CD. From the time I spent playing Outlaw Rogue, you play with cooldown reduction all the time, so having cooldown reduction mechanics incorporated for other classes and specs is something that personally excites me, because you can take some of the biggest hitting buttons and just be able to use them more often, which can be fun. You can shorten the CDs of certain powerful abilities that enhance your character, which changes the timings of how you play in raids and in dungeons. And you can sometimes even shorten CCs, which can be super impactful in PvP. Safe to say, I value CDR very highly. Also, the Kyrian Shaman Totem is basically a meme. It's not really something that's commonly played right now. Ventier has had play, Night Phase getting quite a bit of play for enhancement. Even Necrolords can get a bit of play if someone is, let's say, a Elemental Shaman main, for example. But that won't stop me for trying it out, because Kyrian Mage used to be a meme. Now everybody plays it, so I really wanted just to test the limits of this new legendary. What I think is really cool to this legendary for enhancement Shaman, well, I guess the Kyrian Shaman in general, is the fact that the AoE damage that the totem will do with the legendary is uncapped. The totem itself does have a cap to how many targets it hits, but that final blast after you expend 3 healing charges or 3 damage charges has 0 cap whatsoever. As Mythic Pluses go into scale out of control when it comes to the new season, once players get enough gear, you are going to go back to players pulling literally half the room into one singular spot and having as many classes with uncapped AoE down as much as possible. So let's take a look at the actual damage itself that I've been able to do from dungeons, and we'll talk about the potential possibilities and where I think this legendary, if any use, where could it be useful. For my enhancement shaman, I felt like in AoE trash packs above 5 targets, we were actually popping off. This legendary has a very short CD, or the Covenant ability has a very short CD of 1 minute, which allows this legendary quite a lot of breathing room. And for my overall, Vesper Totem is normally about between 4% and 5% of my damage, where the actual legendary becomes like 10 to 13% of my damage. So the Covenant ability really does shine. There is some substantial damage behind it. And together, once I get the mechanical soulbind, I will be able to cut it down from a minute CD down to 40 seconds in trash packs with extra damage on top of it. So essentially I'll have even more damage output once I have enough renown and the right soulbind traits unlocked. Where I felt on my enhancement shaman that it lacked in was a single target damage. It is okay amount of single target damage, but it's not fantastic. I think I need to change around my talents. If I commit a lot of my CDs, like Ascendants as well as Ghost Wolves into the boss, then we got some damage rolling. But also maybe the lack of gear on a shaman, since this is an alt, not a main. I've been focusing a lot this season on my main. I think a lot of people have as well. Eventually my alts are going to get caught up, and this legendary is going to scale because it does do more damage with primary stats. But as my shaman gets better gear, this thing will do more damage, which means more substantial AoE damage. But I think a single target, even with the mechanical soulbind, is still going to be somewhat lacking here and there. It's worth mentioning that this legendary does improve in damage the better my primary stats are, so that I'm getting better gear on this alt shaman, which is, in 224 item level, which last season it was pretty good item level. This season it's a very starter item level. So with this character being an alt of mine, this legendary is going to scale up in damage as the time goes on, especially as you get the soulbind for mechanicals, the last trade. But I still think it's going to be kind of okay-ish single target damage, not anything impressive. With the season 2 stuff for mythic pluses, for example, you can pick up certain powers from the Torghast mobs, like Necrotic, for example, does fantastic single target damage. And maybe I can run some different talents, like maybe drop an Ascendance for more Ghost Wolves, the Elemental Wolves talent, so you can use Wolves in boss fights and use it in ads, and you'll probably have a bit more consistent damage output rather than the big bursty damage. Your focus overall would be still to do big AoE damage and cleave, especially if the tank can pull multiple mobs together or even pull mobs onto a single target boss. But in pure single target, I feel like this is where you are going to fall off just by the nature of this legendary. It doesn't really scale so well on one singular target. And the same thing can be said for elemental shamans as well as it can for enhancement shamans, especially for elemental, since you are more of an AoE spec rather than a single target spec, especially with how people build themselves for mythic pluses in particular. I guess you could play all tyrannical, but where you shine and where the bread and butter is for you is the AoE cleave earthquake damage, and throwing this legendary on top of it could also be pretty good. Where I think the hidden potential for this Lego is actually going to be is if you play Restoration. As a Restoration Shaman, you are looking to do a little bit of healing to help out your party, but also any kind of damage you contribute in Mythic Pluses can be substantial. And the way that this Vesper Totem works, it's very hybrid. There's a healing element and a damage element involved. For enhancement and elemental to stop DPSing to just use some healing abilities just to proc the totem can feel weird, but for a Restoration Shaman that can be natural because you'll weave some damage with Flame Shock, some healing with Riptides, and the totem will naturally kind of go off, doing damage to enemies but also healing to allies. And if you are playing it with a mechanical soulbind, that means you'll have this totem available in every single trash pack. So every trash pack should see this totem go off, whether you utilize it for the healing boost for your allies or for damage on enemies, which could again be that very hybridy build. Patch 9.1 is going to bring a lot of different builds for us to play with, and we'll probably be playing our classes in a completely different way in just about a month, because over time, over as weeks go by, we'll get more renown, more of that Covenant campaign, and more soul binds unlocked. And once we unlock all our soul binds with the new Covenant legendaries, with some of the different builds that people can come up with, right now we're playing the Covenants we're used to from patch 9.0, but in 9.1, after we have the renown and full soul binds unlocked, we might be playing completely different versions of the classes that we've played before. There's a lot of cool ideas on the table that Blizzard added for patch 9.1. We just gotta let the weeks roll by and get the renown in order to be able to try some of these builds, and that's something I really want to experiment with in the future. Starting off with the Kyrian Shaman. Definitely was a very interesting setup to try. I want to give it another go next time I can get a little bit more renown once I unlock soul binds for Mechanicas, but until then, we're just gonna have to wait. Thank you guys so much for checking out this video. Let me know what you think about the potential of the Kyrian Shaman in the future, and I'll see all of you in the next one.